Order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Quorum call.
Director Black?
Here.
Director Kreutz?
Here.
Director Dakotas?
Here.
Director Heath?
Here.
Director Marian?
Here.
Director Moses?
Excused.
Director Meserve?
Here.
Director Sargent? Here. Director Silvestri?
Here.
Director Welch?
Here.
Chairman Carlo?
Present.
Mr. Nobile?
Here.
Ms. Hall? You have 10 members present and 1 excused.
10 directors present and 1 director excused. A quorum is present. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the board?
Yes.
Please do so.
Good evening. I'm Todd Delaney, by the way. I live in Standish. Outside of the fact of being resident of Standish and sitting on the Standish Planning Board, I was also one of the members of the Budget Advisory Committee. Unfortunately, because I will not be present on the night of May the 15th, I wanted to come and speak. Yes, I am fully aware of the changes made to the proposed budget on 410. I've read and kept up to date, just in case. One of the concerns or questions that has come up and was a statement made not only during the budget advisory process, but I wanted to make sure I had a chance to say it to the school board as well as to the viewing public. I spoke as one of the members of the budget advisory committee to probably at least 40 families in our district during the budget process, as well as about 18 of our staff. Specifically, they were all primarily from the Bonnie Eagle Middle School. They spoke at length about the need for the school resource officer, in a sense structured through the Buxton Police Department. I know it got removed on 410, as I said. The reality is that that is a major concern, not only for the safety of our students, but also the safety of our staff. Not only have I gotten phone calls over the last couple of days, but I have gotten several calls from people who want to make sure that the school board understands the distinction between not only the fact of the necessary, let's say, advantage of a school resource officer, but there are districts like Gorham, who I have a lot of contact with, through the Gorham Key Club, who have 4 school resource officers, and we have 1. I can understand the fact and the concerns about school resource officers in other departments and other places. But Bonnie Eagle is not, since Boston or Chicago or other places. This is, basically Bonnie Eagle. And the reality is that there are a lot of things that social workers can do, but resource officers specifically have the capabilities of doing. Social workers, may be able to intercede. I once made the comparison of the difference between snowplow drivers and school bus drivers. There are several, in a sense, in our district. I would love to have, some of our, let's say, school bus drivers could probably drive one of our plows, but I wouldn't want too many of our plow guys maybe to drive a school bus unless they were certified and trained. The reality is the same. School resource officers, if there was an incident on campus, I wouldn't want one of our administrators, even though it's allowable, to have to drive home a unruly student who just, let's say, struck a staff person, versus the fact of having, as I kidded the superintendent and the administration, they have police cars with, let's say, equipment that can handle an unruly student. And they are also, in a sense, school resource officers can intercede on a TRO or temporary restraining order or custodial issues. I wouldn't want our administrators, nor would I want one of our staff, like our social workers, to intercede. Those are issues that I've encountered both as a parent as well as also as a school board member, where you do not want to see how those issues can escalate quite quickly into an incident which could be concerning. I want to thank the staff and administration. They presented the facts. I think you guys have a copy of this lovely Venn diagram, because one of the conversations over the last several years as we've discussed resource officers is the cases that we didn't have actual data about what was going on in our district. So I implore you to understand that this issue will continue to come up. It will continue to be addressed. But there were a lot of families and a lot of staff who felt that, in a sense, unfortunately, to a very vocal minority of people, citing a lot of things that were concerns outside of the scope and range, that they weren't, in a sense, presenting a school resource officer as much of an asset. And so I agreed to come and speak. I appreciate your time and energy, and as I said, unfortunately, I just wasn't going to be able to hear on the night of the 15th, but I did want to talk to you as a whole about this one issue. I hope you have a pleasant evening.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Delaney. Are there any questions? All right. Are there any further members of the public who wish to address the board? Item 5, review of the proposed 2025-2026 general fund budget in the amount of $65,803,010 with local share of $36,791,763. Chair recognizes the superintendent.
Good evening. One thing I'd like to do as we begin this conversation is there were questions at the previous meeting about enrollment and staffing and a few other things. So a little bit late for the packet, but I did put together a supplement to the packet, which I passed out to you tonight. There are some available outside the door. They'll be included in the minutes. It's very similar to something the Budget Advisory had already had the chance to look at, and we just hadn't gotten to the point of sharing it. I did spend some time updating it and sort of analyzing it, and I'd like to kind of review that before we get into the numbers, because it relates directly to kind of how we arrived at the numbers we arrived at with this year's proposed budget. So if you look at this packet, that's at the kind of the bottom, it says enrollment, staffing, and other considerations, and we have it up on the big screen. The first page is a 10-year comparison in staffing, and I just want to say this is a little bit, it's a very interesting exercise, but it was a little bit of a challenge because how we record and report things and our software has changed a little over time, and you'll see lots of partial staff numbers. And part of that is because we're doing a lot more precision budgeting, whereas in the past it had been a little more of a round numbers kind of process, and that's fine. But when you're trying to draw comparisons, there are some subtle differences that I'll highlight. But overall, it gives us a pretty good picture of where we were at with staffing 10 years ago and where we are now. And I think it was an interesting exercise, and that's why I want to spend a few minutes taking you through that. So on that first page, this is really teaching positions, right? We have a lot of different people that work for us, and we'll get to those in other pages. This page is really just people who are in the teacher pool at these different sites. So the first table there is FY 2015, and the grand total was 278.7 at that time. I think if you look at that, there's nothing super unexpected there. I don't have the enrollment on this same page. There is an enrollment slide later, I believe, but our enrollment was greater. I'll just say that. It was significantly greater. I would say a couple hundred students greater at that time. So if you then go to the second chart for FY 2025, you can see that our overall staffing increased to 292. And again, this is just teachers, and that's a difference of 30, I have it written somewhere on one of these pages, but I think it's like 34, basically. So if you look at what explains those changes, that's what interested me, is taking a look at why do we have more people when we have less kids? Because that's a fair question for people to ask. And I also want to step back and say, Dawn and I, this is our second time building the budget from scratch. And these are the kinds of questions that we're trying to look at as we go through that process, because it's time to be looking at these things. And so if there are people in the community that are saying, how come they're not looking at this? Well, we are. That's exactly what we're doing, because we have the same questions. So you can see at Bonnie Eagle High School, interestingly enough, the staffing has gone down about 4 to 5 positions, depending on how you do the math. And that is what you might expect with a decrease in enrollment. Bonnie Eagle Middle School, at first blush, you say, oh, they have three more staff members. But when you look at those columns that say 6, 7, and 8, those are the grade level teachers. And if you compare 2015 to 2025, there was a reduction in the CLAN teachers. What increased were something lumped into a category called specials, and I have not done a deep dive into that. But I do think some of that is more offerings outside of their reading, writing, social studies, and science and math. So that would be something that we'll be looking at moving forward is who are the people attached to that 20? What do they do? How do we dive deeper into that? So kind of flat at the middle school, but very specific areas that the staffing actually went up instead of down. If you look at the elementary schools as a whole, it's relatively flat. A couple of increases, but some of those are explained by additional two pre-K classes that we didn't have. HB Emory was kind of interesting because it's a small school. They actually have more teachers now than they did, but that was at a time when HB Emory had a sort of an enrollment blip. They didn't have as many kids at that time, so they had less teachers. And over time, we actually had to add a few more teachers because they gained a few more students in that particular school. The other thing I'll say is this is what has prompted our whole conversation around consolidation of our elementary schools because we struggle to use our staff efficiently. There'll be another slide that's more detailed on this in a few minutes, but it's really hard to average the kids out across the district when you have them in so many different locations. So again, that slide will be more descriptive. And then the single really biggest factor in this is we dedicated resources to the Learning Center at Frank Jewett, which is both the Learning Center and Evolve, which is a day treatment program that keeps us from having to send kids to out-of-district placements, high-cost placements. So there's an additional, if you look at the 2015 under FJ, right, that's three special ed staff. And then now when you look, we have 8, 9 through 12 staff and 1 special ed staff. So that's an increase of, 6 staff members that are doing a couple things. One is keeping kids in school, improving our graduation rates and reducing our dropout rates, which earns us more subsidy. And we also have Evolve there, which is saving us super expensive placements for kids. And in some cases, we're providing education for kids that aren't able to access other facilities. They are being sent out of other facilities back to us, and this allows us to continue to educate them. So I would just say those 6 positions, while they have a cost, are probably saving the district. I shouldn't say saving. They are probably paying for themselves in the subsidy we are not losing, right? So there is definitely room to look at staffing, but I just wanted to give you that high-level analysis, and we can, maybe if I get through the next couple pages, and then we can come back for questions. The next page, if you flip, it's staffing by role, and these are a lot of support positions. Some of these are positions that are technically teachers, but they weren't counted on the other page. And then a lot of the school support, and then other support positions. And so when you look at that first chart, admin assistants, secretaries, and ed techs, that's a pretty big increase in that population. And when you start going down the list, high school and middle school, fairly flat. High school actually a little bit reduced over time. Buxton Center added a significant number of staff. But when you think about that too, there's a couple reasons for that. And one is the needs of the special ed population. I think that we'd find that the special ed programming at Buxton is more extensive now in 2025 than it was in 2015, which creates the need for more support staff. Edna Libby, similar thing. Edna Libby now has a composite program, which means I think there's at least 3 ed techs associated with that program. The other schools, they weren't substantial increases, but when you add them all up, it all adds up. And there's a slide later where I summarize this, but I'll get to that because this is my way. I get ahead of myself, but I will. We don't get substitutes on a regular basis. Thank you to anyone who does substitute. I think one is in the audience tonight, but we have a core group of people that still come in and sub, but we do not have a large number of people who sub for us. And so one of the strategies we've taken is we've had to hire more ed techs to be available to cover classrooms when teachers are out. So that is part of this increase in support staff also. Our guidance services have stayed pretty flat. Library media specialist is a very specific area. It's something that gets reported separately, which is why it's on a separate chart. But again, that stayed flat. Health is another one I want to draw your attention to. We made a commitment coming out of COVID to staff all of our buildings with either a nurse or a health assistant. In some cases, we couldn't find a health assistant, and I made the decision to staff it with a nurse rather than leave it uncovered. Some of our schools are not close to emergency services or to health, to medical help, and we have kids with different kinds of needs, significant allergies. I would say the nurse at one of our schools paid for itself fully last year when I was informed of a 911 call and we had to have a kid rushed to the hospital, and the nurse was there and was able to help stabilize the student, and everything worked out fine. But if we didn't have somebody there, we're leaving a secretary or a teacher to deal with that who has limited to no medical training. So that is 4 positions that have, added to our overall staffing. But I would say some would say, well worth it. Our admin assistants that are not school-based. So these aren't just central office, but also you can see the different places that those people work. It's fairly flat. The biggest change, and this is something I was talking to Director Heath about, under adult ed, it was reported as 1 in 2015, reported as 0.8 in 2025. I think that is one of those reporting things that we're now being more precise that person doesn't work a full year-round schedule. I'm not sure they ever did. Maybe they did. That wasn't intended to really be a reduction in services there. It's just more of our precision budgeting at work. So you can see that, we have a part-time person out of the superintendent's office that used to be full-time, but generally those services are flat. We have not added in 10 years to those positions. And miscellaneous is interesting because this is sort of everybody that doesn't fit in one of the other categories, but it includes a lot of really important people, including bus drivers, custodians, maintenance. So you can see there that we actually had a reduction, a fairly significant reduction, 17 or 18 there when you look at the net. But we also had to increase by 3 technology associates. And I still think you'd find for an organization with over 4,000 devices and all of the tech support we provide that I don't think we have extra people floating around in technology. I think technology would tell you they're happy to have what they have, but if resources were not limited, they could probably use more. So I don't think that's a case of being overstaffed. Our bus drivers, our custodians are well needed. The custodians are another example of the inefficiency of scale. We have more custodians because we have more buildings to take care of. If we didn't have as many buildings, we probably don't need quite as many custodians. Food service and bus drivers are the 2 that have sort of reduced proportionally with our enrollment. If you look at the next page, this is one that gets a lot of people's attention. We have too many administrators. But here's what I'm going to say about that. People say that, but when they call the school, guess who they want to talk to? They want to talk to the principal, and they don't want to hear that the principal's at the other school today, or the principal can't get back to them. So the commitment that Paul Penna had made and that I have made is to have our building staffed with a person who is responsible and can be responsible and responsive to parents. The high school has not changed in those years. Is it something we need to look at moving forward if our enrollment continues to decline? Yes, maybe 5, because that 5 includes the athletic director, the principal, 2 assistants, and the dean of students. That may be something we have to look at if our enrollment continues to slide. But the other thing I'll say is the behaviors of students coming into our schools is not always proportionate with the enrollment. We still have a lot of serious behaviors to deal with. If you spend any time at the high school or middle school office, there is plenty of work to go around for all of those folks. In fact, teachers will still say they don't see enough of their administrators out in the halls. And if you stay in the office, it's because the kids are coming to them, they're finding them, and they're staying very busy. But something that responsibly we can look at moving forward. Middle school of note, at one point it used to be a principal and 2 assistants, and at one point it was technically reduced to a principal, 1 assistant, and a dean of students, which is slightly less expensive and has different responsibilities. The other schools, the difference there, it went from 5 to 7 in those elementary schools. We added an elementary dean of students to help manage truancy and chronic absenteeism and to help cover one of the smaller schools. And then somewhere along the way, I was trying to work out the people behind this, but we did add an administrator to cover because we were going to get to a situation where we had somebody potentially dealing with 3 buildings, and that did not seem sustainable. But in the last 10 years, we've technically added 2 positions there, and then the director at TLC. That used to be more of a teacher on special assignment with leadership stipends, And about, I think, 7 years ago, the commitment was made to make that a director position. And again, I'll say that I think the graduation numbers, the number of the dropout rate has all substantially been impacted by that director position. Adult ed hasn't changed. Special services curriculum, superintendent, assistant superintendent, all consistent. Business manager, finance manager is one that I actually think that 10 years ago we had like a head accountant or something. We didn't call it a leadership position, but we converted it to a finance manager. I think the salary was, I'm sure, somewhat different, but I don't think it's substantially different. So that's a reporting thing, but technically that's one that accounts for one of the 7. We have an HR director, HR manager, an organization with 700 employees, and we have 2 people in HR. Go ahead, somebody can tell me we're overstaffed. I'm gonna say we're not. I'm gonna say we probably could use one more person to help deal with those things, but that's not where we are. So we have, and again, the person in that position 10 years ago didn't have this title, but did a lot of the same things. Tech director, data specialist, school nutrition. This is another one where the school nutrition director used to have a secretary. Somewhere along the way that was sort of shifted to be used as a more of a, the title is school nutrition coordinator. If that person functions as more of an assistant director, can take on more responsibility. So it was more of a conversion of a position rather than a total replacement, but we'll count it as an add. Transportation, again, one of the largest bus fleets in the state, and we have 3 people running the department, one of which is the in-house trainer who trains all our drivers and trains other people to drive buses. And I think that has helped us keep our bus driving force up to date. And then those other positions, I won't go through them one at a time, but they're all things that haven't really changed. And in fact, we have a maintenance supervisor, or have had over the years, and currently don't have anybody in that position. And I think we're okay as is. So that basically 4 positions in, is it 4 in ops? 2, well, does that get me to 7? No, it doesn't. That's 6. But you can see it's balanced, I guess, on either side of both the educational and operations side. And then the next page is just a chart that kind of shows a lot of things I went over. You can see our overall, counting everybody that works for us, was around 662 10 years ago, and we're just over 700, depending on how many .1s and .3s you count. So that's about 40 more people 10 years later. And that's one reason why the budget we presented to you is a reduction of 7 positions, because we need to start looking at this and bringing this in line with our enrollment decline. If we keep going, these next pages are summaries and highlights of the things I've already said. I'm happy to pause for a minute if anyone has any particular questions about staffing or anything they want to know more about.
Dr. E.
With the staffing that you have right now, currently around 704, do you anticipate, given the projections of enrollment, that this will stay pretty much the same? Do you see significant needs or areas that we may have a growth so that perhaps in another 10 years we would have 10 or 20 more staff?
That's a great question. It's hard to predict because what I keep hearing about, and I know it, I see it, I drive around and I see it. There are so many new housing developments and new homes for sale, and there's this warning like, be careful, you're gonna have a lot of kids, we have not seen that yet. We have not seen the influx of enrollment, and the enrollment projections that we have had done and that we have been shared with us show us leveling out at about 240 students per grade, right, all the way up through, with a little bit of variation, whereas we used to be typically more like 250, 260. I think the current junior class has like 270 kids in it, and that's one of the biggest. And I don't think we have another class that big coming in behind. So there may be a class in the middle school actually when we get to that. So to answer your question, from what I see, we're leveling off. And that's what the enrollment projections say, that we're sort of leveling off and we're finding our groove, and then it's going to be having them move through the system. The high school is going to go through a little bit of a lull. I think they're going to drop, we've dropped below 1,000, 995 currently. It's going to go back up a little bit with the seniors leaving and the 8th graders coming in, but not substantially. And then I think the year after, it's going to go down again and kind of stay there. So I think that if we can be responsible, and if we have a retirement, a resignation, somebody leaves, if we have a new teacher that doesn't work out and we don't bring them back, before we fill any of those, we stop and we assess, do we need this? And that isn't a next year thing. I'm in one of these charts, enrollment shows sort of right now the current projection, but I know our administrators are doing that right now if they have resignations or retirements coming in now, they are pausing, looking at their enrollment to decide, do they absolutely need it? And I anticipate next year that there'll be a handful more positions that we could identify. I don't want to say find, we know where they are. We could identify that are probably things we could get away without and have little impact on students. Because I think that's our goal, is to responsibly reduce staffing without having this huge impact on the community, on kids, on staff. I'm seeing this happen in other places right now. They didn't do this, presumably, and now they're being hit with having to reduce 18 positions, 20 or more positions. When you do that in 1 year, people are losing their jobs, right? And I don't want to be that district. So I think for the next few years, I would see us trying to responsibly reduce when we see opportunities to reduce. And I think that's a trend that could continue for a couple of years. And then we'll level out and we'll find what our operational sort of ideal is and maintain that. I talked about a lot of these, so I won't repeat myself. The departmental average is anticipated to be, I can't bring in the course catalog in every course scheduled at the high school, but when they've analyzed this at the high school, they're ranging between 15 and 18 students on average in each department, right? So math is going to be different than social studies, but that's after reducing a couple of positions. I think 3 came out of the high school. So that's a pretty healthy number from the way I see it. Some of the differences that you saw were in inequities. I talked about nursing. There used to be a time when guidance and social work access was kind of different depending on what school you were in. The art, music, PE, and library could have been different, but we've come a long way to even those things out. We've expanded pre-K, so we have 2 more classes. And I think going back to 2015, I was trying to remember, but I think we might have only had 2 pre-Ks back in 2015, but I can't remember. I'd have to go back and verify that. We talked about alternative programming and then some of the other special ed programming. Another thing we've added is transition programming for 20 plus year old students that we still have responsibility for faith. And then the second page, again, talked about some of the support positions, ed techs, talking about the behaviors and IEP services, and then the health services. And then again, I think I covered all these also. The director, HR manager, yeah, so I won't belabor that. So if you go to page, I think it's 9, labeled 9 in the packet, this is our current elementary school enrollment for this year. I actually went in today, I think, and I updated the projection. I didn't update this, but this was, I feel like, March. This was our actual enrollment of this year with all the class sizes and averages. You can see the number of teachers in each building is that sort of second line where it says teachers under the school. Right under the school name, like under Buxton Center, that 531 is their enrollment as of the time this was created, and the average class size in the school. And so you can see that pattern down through the different schools. And this is where I'm talking about, if you could put them all into one big pool and do an average, we could probably reduce some positions here and find efficiencies, but that isn't the way our district is set up. You can see the class size averages, and then that far right column is the total number of teachers, and this is just the classroom teachers, pre-K to 5 classroom teachers. So that's our current state. And then if you flip the page, 25, 26, this is what we're projecting, because we don't know we can pretty much say our pre-K numbers are solid because we'll fill our spots. Kindergarten is a wild card. So this is, as of today, this is how many kids who had registered for kindergarten in each school. And you can see this is with 2 less teachers because we are reducing our elementary teaching staff by 3. Those are 3 of the 6. 1 was an unfilled position that we carried forward and never used. And 2 more are coming out of, I think 1 out of Hollis and 1 out of Buxton. And the overall average is now 92 staff. And you can see it did not substantially change the average class size. And I'll draw your attention to Hollis, and this is an example of the admin team continuing to see what they can do to be responsible. The principal of Hollis understands that if we don't get a substantial number of more kids enrolling in kindergarten at Hollis, that she probably isn't going to need to run a third kindergarten. And she happens to have staff turnover that will allow that without somebody losing their job. She has options. There's an opening in first grade, I think, from a resignation. A kindergarten teacher could move to first. So she's going to hold off filling that to see how this enrollment turns out because, you know, again, my first year as an elementary principal, I learned that 19 or 20 kindergartners is very different than 19 or 20 third graders, depending on how they come into you. But 9.3, I don't think anybody can argue that 9.3 is even helpful. I think it's hard sometimes to only have 9 kids in your class. So that's an example. I know there's at least one other situation on here of a principal who has another resignation, is considering whether they're going to consolidate from, let's say, 4 to 3 because they think it can work. So again, we're trying to be responsible. We'll look at our staffing before we fill those positions. And then the high school, middle school, this is just a really high-level enrollment look. It's just current year and next year projection. You can see the middle school will go up by, 9 students because the 6th grade coming in is a little bit bigger than the 8th grade going out. And the high school, same kind of thing. The seniors leaving are being replaced by a slightly bigger class. Actually, there's yeah, and there were a couple of registrations or something for next year too, which was interesting. Because right now we already know there are kids who have signed up for us for next year that might be in move-ins or whatever. But you can see the high school pops back up a little bit for next year, but not substantially. And then this last page, I'll just say we might come back to this, but someone had asked for the data on the SRO, and I made the note. I just want everyone in the community to understand that it has been removed from the budget, and unless this board directs it to be put back in, it is out of the budget. But we had never shared the data we shared with Budget Advisory, and that didn't seem right. So this is a summary, but there's also a separate handout that I passed out to you that Lori had put together that has more information on it with resources of how the SRO had spent his time. And then there's an addition down at the bottom, the last bullet. We also got data from Buxton to see how many calls they responded to, even though they don't have anybody assigned to the school. So 38 calls in 2024, and then 17 through this year. So, 50 plus calls that Buxton responded to. So there you go. If you have any questions about that before we dive into the financial side of things, happy to entertain them. All right, so I think Tina's going to put it up on the screen, and I think I'll let the person who has the most in-depth knowledge of this process do more of the talking here. I think the plan is maybe like a high-level overview and then article by article, some of the highlights. And one of the things that we hear every year, and we're trying to do better at this year, and we're going to do better at the budget meeting too, is what's in the article. I think a lot of people don't understand, and I get it. Like, it's hard to keep track of. So we're going to try to do better, making sure like everybody in this room knows, and then also when we're at the budget meeting, the community knows what is in each of the articles that we're required to consider separately.
Okay, so in the other packet that was provided for tonight, I gave a brief budget history for the last 10 years. It shows the total for each year broken down by salary, benefits, and non-labor, and the dollar difference and the percent difference. So I provided that for both the general fund, local, and then the food service and adult ed. On page 4, This is a summary of the proposed FY26 budget. As you can see, the general fund is an overall 3.93% increase. Adult ed is actually a decrease of 2.14%. Sorry, adult ed is a decrease of 0.67%, and nutrition services is an increase of 11.23%, leading to an overall increase of 4.17%. Taking those numbers and then adding all the anticipated revenues leads to an assessment to the towns of a 3.77% increase. And on page 5, it shows the assessment, a total assessment for the FY26 budget would be $37,216,193, and that is broken down by town. Again, the average increase is 3.77%, but based on the valuations that we get from the state, it's a different amount for each town. Are there any questions, comments about, I mean, I know I went over that really quickly, but if there are any.
Could you just draw, I just want to make sure people see, I think we've talked about it ad nauseum about the carry forward that we're putting in, just to make sure people are aware of that, that 4.5?
So the total we're looking to carry forward is 4.5 million. 4,520,000. 400 of that is from the local general fund. 450 is coming from food service, and 80,000 or 70,000 is coming from adult ed. So each of those funds has a fund balance, and we're using approximately half of each of those fund balances to mitigate the taxes for next year.
And the reason I just want to draw everyone's attention to that, and some of this is for the public too, is we've heard the last couple of years, budget advisory 2 years ago, I think, this came up a lot. Why are you raising more money when you have this money sitting there? You're raising too much. And it's a hard, like I don't have a great answer for people if we were intentionally doing that, because I agree, we shouldn't be just sort of going out of our way to raise more money. The problem is the revenue is, it's hard to predict the revenue, and it's hard to predict how much you're going to expend of a budget. So we are trying to do better with that. Again, this is only the second time Don and I have really been responsible, so we're trying to be mindful of being more precise with the budgeting and using more of the funds that we've already raised before we're asking for more. But there is that risk that, right, you become sort of dependent on that buy down of the rate of increase, and we just have to be careful and monitor it. And we're going as far as we feel comfortable doing, but it's definitely something we want to continue to monitor.
I just also add, for the benefit of members of the public, that the purpose of having a carry forward also serves to provide some relief when you have one-time emergency expenses that maybe weren't included as part of the budget, or would cause significant tax increases for the following fiscal year. So having that cushion there is helpful. I generally oppose using carry forward money for this purpose. I believe its proper role is for emergencies of a one-time nature, and I'm wondering, what is the current amount in the carry forward account now?
In 2024, at the end of June, our audit stated we had about $10 million in the fund balance. At the end of 2025, I am anticipating that that number is going to be around 8.5 million.
So what's the plan to replenish the account? Do we have one?
No, because we are trying to budget as close as we can to our actual expenses. Like Clay said, it's a balancing act. We don't want to tax more than we have to. At the same time, again, when creating a budget, you anticipate that that carry forward that you're going to use is going to stay constant. We can't both budget as close to actual as possible and keep using the amount of money that we're using for carry forward.
And if I could add, that's why the other thing we're trying to do is to reduce the overall, it's not reducing the budget, because that's, obviously people can see this an increase, to reduce the commitments that we're carrying year to year. By reducing 7 positions, those are 7 things that are not going to be in next year's budget, right? So that is one strategy that we're trying to use. If we continue to responsibly reduce staff, the increases should be less. And that need for carry forward, I think we'll have a better idea in 1 more year, right? Because I agree with the chair that we really need to get off this reliance on carry forward, but to do it, it doesn't feel right to try to do it this year at the cost of raising, when we have, the last, it was after last year, right? It was $10 million. It's hard to say to somebody in the community, well, we have this $10 million, but we're not using it, and your taxes are going up. I struggle with that, right? So I think that we feel like we've reduced it a little bit, right? It was 4.8 and it's 4.5, and I think we're going to try to reduce the amount we have to use to offset the budget. I think that's our goal, and have it level out, because it was very unusual. These last few years have been unusual. Mr. Brockman used to talk about this, the COVID funds, the reimbursements, and it just created a strange dynamic that we thought it was going to go down, and then it didn't go down. We ended up having more revenue than we anticipated. And that, I think, made people think we were crying wolf, that this fund balance, we were raising too much money, and what are you doing? And now we're trying to monitor that, and because I think it's getting real now. There aren't any more unanticipated revenues out there.
And I appreciate the explanation. And I agree with the superintendent that now's not the year to cut off the pipeline from the carry forward. But the problem's not going to go away, and next year we're going to have the same conversation, and I'm seeing that we only have 8.5 million in the account. So I just think it's incumbent on us to think about, and I know we are thinking about it, about what is the plan for this $4.5 million. So, Director Sargent.
Just a little background. A lot of that money, the $10 million, is a result of COVID funds. That artificially pumped it up. Conversely, the legislature increased it. I think, Don, it went from 9% that we were allowed to carry forward. There's a current bill in the legislature which wants to not reduce it back to 5%, but leave it at 9%, because of many unexpected things that have happened in the schools, and it allows them some slack, if you will, or a cushion for these unexpected things. And getting back to we spent hours and hours on this budget, and you've got to build in enough money to run your schools. And if you have anything left over, it doesn't go away. It goes back into carry forward or back into the general fund or designated revenue. So I don't believe we're over budgeting. Looking forward with all these old buildings we have. And really, folks, we've got $30+ million that we could do right now to bring our schools up to code. And we're allocating like $1 million or $800,000 this year. So if you were paving roads, you'd say you're not getting much paved this year. And going forward, we really need to put more into our schools or consolidate or look at something that takes less revenue. Thank you.
That fund balance is also used as cash flow. We're very fortunate to have that, especially with how the federal grants work, where we are awarded money, but we have to spend it, put the money out the door before we can ask to be reimbursed for those funds. And I know of school districts that have to do revenue anticipation notes to cover their payroll, to cover their cash flow, because they're not in our position. So it's not only used to mitigate taxes, as you said, it's also a cash flow tool. Okay, let's go to page 6. Article 1 is regular instruction, and that's our pre-K through grade 12 programming. Alternative ed programs, which you know as our TLC program, our English language learners, and our gifted and talented programs. The FY26 proposed budget is $25,729,268, a difference of $171,076, or a 0.67% increase. The salaries and benefits is an increase of $384,491. The contracted average salary increase in this group is 4.3%. We cut 6 positions through attrition and non-renewals. And as you're aware, we had a health insurance increase of 12.7%. The non-labor was a reduction of $213,415. We cut our contingency, $150,000. We had contingency in our Article 1 of $300,000. And we cut it by 150. And then we also moved an MLTI. Technology has a lease for MLTI devices, and they did a new lease this year that included some equipment that was not MLTI devices, so they had a van. And that cannot be included in Article 1. So the amount for that lease was moved to Article 5.
So that contingency, what would that typically, or what could that be used for? Why would we hold that contingency, and what might we use that for?
Good question.
Right, hard to say. How often, like, can you recall in the last couple of years have we used it?
In the past few years, we have not had to use it.
Would it be like high-cost out-of-district placements? Would that be a
No,
different
that
article?
would be Article 2.
Okay, thanks. So to our point earlier about trying to be more precise and responsible, we had that money in there. We haven't used it, so we're taking the chance that we don't need to continue to carry it forward into the next budget and increase people's taxes. So
Correct.
reduced it. Thank you.
Any discussion about Article 1? Okay. Article 2, special programs. That includes our special ed administration, our resource rooms, our self-contained rooms, homebound and hospital includes tutoring, and our services for, specifically for special ed, which there are social workers that deal with just our special ed students, health services, psych services, speech and audiology, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. Article 2 is an increase of $907,735, or 7.55%. The salaries and benefits were an increase of $765,649. The contracted average salary increase was 6.56%. And again, the health insurance increase of 12.7%. Non-labor was an increase of $142,086. And that was a breakdown of adding outside tuition of approximately $30,000, increasing staff travel for the IRS rate. That was increased in their bargaining agreements. So that was an increase of $20,000. And we added contingency here, which didn't have a contingency at all, of $100,000. Now, one out-of-district placement can be more than $100,000. So we're being very conservative with that number. Discussion about Article 2.
Dr. Moran.
Donna, I'm curious, what's driving the $907,735 increase? What's driving that?
Mostly it's salaries and benefits, and it's the increases to salary and the health insurance increase.
Thank you.
Right, because any of these articles that are people heavy, that have a lot of salaries and benefits in them, I think you're gonna see a pattern of that percent increase being higher. And the thing I keep coming back to is, yes, the salary increase is substantial, but needed, because we were losing people out the door, and that's not happening anymore. But being hit 2 years in a row with a 12% health insurance increase, it just seems cruel and unusual. Because I conservatively have used a number of 1.5 million over 2 years, but I think it's closer to 2 if you look at it as if it had been 0 each year, right? We'd had years in the past where we'd had no increase in health insurance for multiple years. 12% each year for 2 years is probably closer to $2 million in our organization. So a chunk of that is here because these are people.
Who's our provider?
Anthem?
Is that?
So it's Anthem, but it's through the MEABT, Maine Educators Association's Benefit Trust.
And are we limited in the plans that we can purchase? Or can we shop and try to find a better deal? I'm not familiar with how schools get their health insurance.
Yes, we can, but not without reaching out to all our collective bargaining agreements, or units, and working with them. And I think it would be a very hard sell to get our teachers' union to go somewhere else.
All right, thank you.
I think it's an interesting idea, and it's something we can definitely look at moving forward. There's a level of complexity, as Dawn said, but we can see what options might be out there to see if it's a way to save. It is a different idea that I think it's probably been a while since I'm sure at some point over time that has been explored, but.
It just is disconcerting to see these increases year after year. And I'm not proposing to, there are employees listening, and I don't want my question to be interpreted as a proposal, but just I need a better sense of how this works and where we can find cost savings and if it's worth it. And I put a very high premium on the health of our people, but it's just helpful to have a sense of, what can we do?
It can be
to-
done, and there
what can we
are
do to
our
lower
school
that-
districts.
That percent. So, thank you.
Yeah, something to explore.
Article 3 is career and technical education. We do not have any programs that fall under this classification code. We've had $10,000 in there for the past, as long as I've been working here, as a placeholder. We could remove it and save $10,000.
Just for the benefit of anyone who might watch this at some point, all of this is, it has been for a number of years, all sort of funneled through the ED 279, directly, provided to or paid to the vocational centers. There's no more pass-through, so that's why. If we were a vocational institution, then this would be different, but it's not anything we.
No, I think my predecessor kept the number in there as if we were to get billed by one of these career and technical schools for some reason, we'd have.
Have we ever gotten billed? The money goes into the carry forward at the end of the year?
Correct.
Okay.
Article 4 is other instruction. This consists of co-curricular activities like student government, band, choir, clubs, honor societies, extracurricular activities like athletics, and summer school, non-special ed summer school. Article 4 is actually a decrease of $48,572, or 3.98%. The salaries and benefits are a decrease of $105,758. For the positions that we have in there, it was actually an average salary increase of 3.21%. But as Clay said, we're really looking at our positions and trying to budget accurately. So we had some stipend positions. What was happening is we had a budget number for stipends, and we were increasing at 1% every year. We're actually looking at Schedule B of our teacher's contract and looking at every position we have and budgeting for those particular positions based on our actual expenses. So doing that, we were able to reduce the stipends by $110,000. The non-labor is an increase of $57,186, and that is due to our game officials. We don't get to say how much these people are paid. Our athletics director sets a schedule and says, okay, we need this many officials for the games. They provide them, and then we have to pay the officials based on what these groups say we have to pay them. So we had to increase that $18,000. We increased supplies $25,000, and we increased the transportation $20,000.
This is an interesting article because I think this is the one that's probably the most misunderstood by people in the public, because in the last couple of years, people say, what's in there? I had one person say, what are you hiding in there? Not really hiding anything, it's all the other things. That's why it's called other instruction. And if we were to cut this substantially, that is sports and activities. And if that's, a place the community eventually wants to go, then that, I think in our community, that would be a pretty big deal, because I think it's something that we offer quite a bit for our kids. And, so I think it's interesting that people don't make that connection. So we're going to try to do better making the connection of what is in that.
And what happens here for is transportation, you'd think, well, why is that in Article 4? Well, the transportation for athletics has to be included here in the extracurricular. So to get our sports teams from point A to point B costs money. And yes, it's our transportation department that does that, but the transportation department bills the athletics, and then we kind of transfer the money, whereas the money is then credited to Article 8.
You said something earlier that intrigued me, that we don't have control over what the AD says we need to have a certain number of people staffing. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So our athletic director can say how many officials we have for a game, but there are, I can't remember the name of the group.
Main PA?
There's a board, each sport has like a board, the officials board, and they decide the rates, and the MPA negotiates with them, but once the MPA...
And we have representation on the board?
I think Eric, in his role as AD, works with the Maine Principals Association, but at the end of the day, we're not in direct negotiation with these officials.
Eric has tried to, what he's done really well is he may have a football game and he might say, okay, where they might recommend, or another school district might have 8 officials, he's looking at his budget and saying, well, we can't afford that, we're only going to have 4.
Okay. So we do have some control?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I probably shouldn't say too much about this, but I remember
that
times
intrigues me.
when it could get contentious because there aren't enough people to do these officiating jobs, and so they have leverage, and they can say, well, we're not going to do any games if you don't pay, and it's gotten to that point in some of the sports, especially the harder to find sports, and it has definitely become a problem that all schools are dealing with in these last few years.
Very important not to engage with people like that, I'd say. All right, thank you.
Article 5, student and staff support. This includes our regular ed social workers, guidance staff, health, nursing, library, curriculum, and instructional technology. This article is an increase of $550,453, or 10.15% increase. Salaries, that is made up of salaries and benefits, which is an increase of $288,619. The contracted average salary increase for our employees in this article is 6.89%. I keep harping on that health insurance increase of 12.7%. The non-labor was an increase of $261,834. The breakdown of this are items that were not budgeted for before. So we had to purchase a cyber insurance policy which was $15,000. Our technology director is looking at firewall hardware and endpoint protection for $60,000. Increased software repair and maintenance of $95,000. This is the increase of the tech lease that came out of Article 1 and is moving to Article 5, $65,000. There was $18,000 in Article 11 for our thought exchange software that is moving into this article. And supplies from Article 7 that is moved here for $20,000. Article 7 is administration, school administration, and we had a lot of supply expenses that they had in there for things like their guidance office and their social workers' offices that really didn't belong there, that we moved appropriately.
So I think another way that you can kind of describe this, that especially those non-labor costs, many of those items didn't appear in this article in the past. And now that they were finding the appropriate place for them, it's showing as a 10% increase, but that is not, which wouldn't be typical, I wouldn't think.
It would not be, and a lot of these things were just unfunded.
Yeah.
Our technology director was trying to find money outside of the budget to do these sort of things, and it was becoming more difficult for him to do that.
Are these recurring? Like I'm looking at the firewall,
Yes,
is that a recurring cost?
yes. Any other discussion about Article 5? Okay. Article 6 is system administration. That includes the superintendent's office, the school board, and the business office. This is an increase of $78,544. Salaries and benefits of $78,291 is the increase. The contracted average salary increase for the employees in this article is 5.78%. And there's that health insurance increase again, 12.7. And there was a non-labor increase of $253.
Are the salaries for principals covered under this article?
No, that's Article 7. This would be central office staff, so anybody that's in the offices down there, the HR, the business office, and then Clay and his staff.
Thank you. Oh,
Any discussion about Article 6? Okay. Article 7 is school administration, and that includes the principals and their school offices. Article 7 is an increase of $114,639, or 4.23%. Mostly what's driving that is the salaries and benefits of $134,322. The contracted average salary increase is 6.14%. And the health insurance increase. And we decreased non-labor $19,683. And again, that was that $20,000 that we moved out of Article 7 into Article 5 for things that had to do with social work and guidance, and that more appropriately belonged to Article 5. Any discussion about Article 7? Okay, Article 8 is transportation. That includes the buses, the drivers, the monitors, and the mechanics. Here we are proposing an increase of $49,223, or 1.01% increase. The salaries and benefits is actually a decrease of $31,577. The contracted average salary increase for employees in this article is 2.18%. The health insurance increase is 12.7%. And here we cut one mechanic position for $104,000. We increased our non-labor by $80,800. And this was purchase professional services of $15,000, and our transportation software, which was paid by the state for many, many years, and next year they are no longer paying for it. So we had to increase our budget by $65,000.
With the salary increase of only 2.18, is that being affected by the mechanic position coming out?
It is not. It is the contracted salaries that was because the bus drivers, they saw the big increase a couple of years ago. So that's why this is showing the way it is.
They were already brought up.
There were corrections that needed in that.
Previous
That
years.
correction was made previously.
Thank you.
I wanted to clarify that too, because people who, couple of things. One is, I think having the articles spelled out this way and having the bullet points of where there were added costs, where there were maybe cost savings, the non-labor costs, this is like the single best document I've ever seen to understand the budget. And so I encourage people who are looking at the budget, and when they look at, if we get a focus on 6 or something, that it has this format, because it really shows you exactly what you're paying for and what's included in each of these. So I know the work and the time it took, so I really want to thank you for putting this together. And if you looked at it quickly, you would say, wow, every other group except the bus drivers and the monitors and the mechanics are getting 6% increases in their salary, and these poor guys and men and women are getting a 2.18%. But that's because as part of the negotiations and chair of the negotiations, we have contracted with them and redone their negotiations several times. So they have seen a big increase that they needed in past years. So this is just the year 2 of a contract where it's just kind of the standard, whereas other negotiated boards, negotiated units came and renegotiated for the first time, so they're seeing more of that, bringing themselves up into alignment. Whereas this has already happened with our bus drivers and mechanics. So I didn't want anyone to think that we didn't equally value them, because we very much do.
Dr. Dakotas.
Can you just explain what the purchased professional services are?
That's
Please.
It's for things like drug testing.
Oh,
All of our drivers are in a pool, and we get random, their name gets called up, they have to go get drug tested.
okay.
It could also be for if there's some body work that our mechanics can't do, we have to farm that out.
Thank you. And the software,
The software we have used for several years was TransFinder, I believe, or Zonar. And as I said, it was a product that was supplied by the state. We didn't have to pay for it. And we have, the transportation director has looked into many different products, and we are going to be going with Bus Right. And it's going to provide a lot more in terms of, there's like an app for parents. You'll be able to track where the bus is. We're going to be redoing all of our routes. So it's an all-encompassing product. We're hoping at some point to be able to monitor ridership as well. So it's a fairly new product. There are some other districts that are using it. They're raving about it. So we're kind of excited
Thank you.
to have it.
I would love to have a demo for the board at some point, once things are more finalized, because I've seen the demos of this too, and it's pretty impressive. I hope I believe it works as it's described, because other districts are using it, and people won't have to call dispatch to find out where their bus is anymore, because I think it has the capability of saying in real time where the bus is, and they can pull out their phone and go, oh, we can go back inside for 5 minutes, and there'll be a lot of kids running out to the bus, but we'll see. But we'll definitely bring you along as we implement that.
Any other discussion about Article 8? Okay, Article 9, Facilities and Maintenance. That includes all of our buildings, our grounds, the equipment, security, and safety. The proposed increase for this article is $895,086, a 10.93% increase. Salaries and benefits are an increase of $173,336. The contracted average salary increase for employees in this article is 4.22%. And the big health insurance increase. The non-labor is an increase of $721,750. And this includes our purchased professional services, things like our contract with Main Security, which is our monitoring the door alarms and that sort of thing, our inspections and our testing that we have to do, that's $90,000. Our purchased property services, so repairs for buildings, grounds, and vehicles, the things that we can't do ourselves, $155,000. Our EEI project, which is the Jack Memorial renovations and the lighting for the buildings that we know we're going to be keeping, $210,000. For supplies, our grounds is $138,000. Custodial supplies, $85,000, and maintenance supplies of $30,000. Our energy increases for electricity, propane, and oil are $41,000. The equipment for custodial and grounds is $30,000. And we have an existing lease that we have to increase to cover that of $21,000. And then we had contingency, I believe, of $375,000, and we're proposing a reduction of $75,000. And we're comfortable reducing that contingency because of our capital reserve for facilities. We have approximately, after the projects that we're purchasing, out of that, we'll have about $2 million still in that fund.
I have two questions. That EEI project, is that a one-time cost, or is that going
No.
to be recurring?
That is a annual cost. It's a lease that we're doing, and it is a 20-year lease.
Thank you. And then for the contingency, so it's, you reduced 75,000, what is the balance? Is there a zero balance in contingency because you're
No.
using the capital reserve, or what's the balance of contingency for that?
So the contingency line was $375,000.
Okay,
We're keeping it at 300.
thank you.
And just for my own purposes, I'll say this out loud, others might have the question when they watch this. Contingency would be money that the facilities director could access without coming to the board. If he has some need, some unanticipated, let's say a part bursts at the high school and water floods, not that that happened this winter. Whereas capital reserve, we would have to come forward and the board would have to approve that. So it's a more formal process.
Correct.
Just as by way of reminder, can you tell us again what EEI means, what it stands for?
Just so happens our facilities director came tonight because he must have known that question would be asked.
Energy efficient investments. It is a company that is known as an ESCO or an energy services company. They come in, they audit, and they find energy savings opportunities for us, which is the lighting, and they help us use that savings to do other projects such as Jack Memorial.
Thank you.
Well,
All right.
Again, what we found is there were a lot of unfunded items that needed to be in this budget that were not. Any other discussion about Article 9?
I'm sure the chair would love to call on me. It's a broken record, you know, I appreciate that this is, you know, it's a almost 11% increase. It's nowhere near what we actually need. So, you know, thank you to those involved who are trying to pick and choose the highest priority. You know, I know that the community can't afford to fix everything now. But, you know, I will just say it again in my out loud voice that this is nowhere near what we need to bring all of our problems and outdated systems up to where they need to be. So keep up the good work of trying to balance it, and everyone plant a money tree in their backyard.
And I just want to add, sorry.
Dr. Sardi.
Our facilities director could speak more to this, but EEI's project will be ongoing, and it'll be school-wide. And it'll be a project that will save us money each year annually. In other words, we're putting $200,000 into it. We'll see significant savings. And I can't remember all the numbers that were thrown out, but it will be significant. So this close to $1 million for this facilities and maintenance, you know, 210 is for the EEI project, which throughout the school is going to save us a lot of money with our old buildings, with new lighting, new ductwork, stuff like that. And we've got to do it just to keep going. So thank you for facilities.
I just wanted to add to that, and we've talked about this, the board is aware of this, this is for the public too, I want to keep saying it. We had $671,000 of other safety-related improvements that needed to be done, and rather than add them on to the budget, because this increase would have been closer to 20% if we added that in, we are using the capital reserve money we already raised from the public that is sitting in an account for us to use. So we are using it rather than raise additional money to put in new intercoms in our schools, to rekey the buildings so they are safe. It has not been rekeyed in some time, and it's kind of a mess. It's just what happens when you have a building this long. There's trying to think what alarm panels, right? Alarm panels are being reworked. So there's any number of safety-related things that we are doing out of capital reserve rather than raise more money, or this number would be even higher. And I also say that because there are people who think we don't spend enough for facilities, but there's a limit. I think you said it, one of you over here, that there's a point where we can't really go where we need to go because we know it would just break people. But we have done considerable work on facilities. Last year there was a lot of concern we didn't do enough, but I feel like we're doing quite a bit with what we have this year.
Dr. Heath.
One additional point is the EEI project, working with the company. They're also experts at leveraging funds, so trying to find efficiency grants, ways that there are other grant monies and things to get our costs down. So that's really helpful. In a big district, there's a lot to do, and sometimes the facilities director, they're not aware of some grant that may exist that would help offset the costs of some of our efficiencies. So working with this company that does these grants and does these applications all the time, that should also help us get some of these costs paid for through grant funds.
Okay. Article 10 is debt service, and that is our capital construction bonds. We currently have one for Buxton Center that we're making payments on, and this article is decreasing $213,012. It's a decrease of 12.92%, and it is due to the interest expense is being decreased due to the principal payment. So you pay interest on your outstanding principal, and we make a principal payment every year, so that is a reduction. And the main bond bank refinanced the bonds as well, so we had a favorable bond refinance, which decreased the rate a little bit.
Remind me, what is that debt? Is that still like the Buxton?
Buxton Center, the school itself,
Yeah,
the
and
building
how
of the school.
many more payments do we know roughly?
It's about 10 years old, and I think it was a 20-year
Okay,
bond.
so we're about halfway there. In the words of Bon Jovi. Thanks.
Any other discussion about Article 10? Okay, the final article, Article 11, is all other. And we are proposing to move all the funds out of there. So our proposal is 0 for FY '26. The difference is a negative $18,000. And those expenses, as I said earlier, are moved to Article 5. It was our thought exchange software that we're moving to the appropriate article.
Dr. Sargent.
Just for the public's information, we did do some work this year, and a bunch of it came out of capital reserve for the maintenance and stuff. But we also did with technology. We took a good amount of money out of the technology reserve, which doesn't show up here. So that is something that the whole board has to approve in a majority to access those funds. And I think that's just wise use of our money. So, thank you, Don.
Dr. Mercer.
I want to make a comment. I am disappointed the SRO was removed from the Buxton Center. I think 38 incidents there really should be re-evaluated for an elementary school to have that many young students. Isn't that what that said, Lori?
You can jump in. I think it's not just Buxton Center. I think in Buxton.
In
So
Buxton.
We have a couple sites.
So it's a combination, actually, most of them are actually to Frank Jewett or the middle school. It
Okay,
is
so
not
it's
police,
still
right.
where this
It's still
SRO
38
would
calls,
go.
but in the, right, it's within the limits of Buxton, but not at Buxton Center Elementary.
And I really think starting young students in the right direction, having somebody there of authority, other than a teacher that has to deal with these incidents, I really hope that is reevaluated.
Director Kreutz.
So thank you for all the presentations on all the articles. Appreciate the detailed response. You know, I'm struck that the increase isn't higher, that 12%. I know you kept harping on it, but that's a huge increase with our budget being significantly salaries and benefits. To have another 12% hit on healthcare and all the benefits. I mean, I'm impressed that the budget isn't a higher increase. You know, and you know, I'm sure folks look at this and see that, you know, the salaries increases are going up, but we've really tried hard in the past few years to negotiate those contracts to go up to a fair level. We were lagging behind in our area, and you have to attract and retain good staff. We're not going to see the educational results if we're not bringing in quality people who are leading our classrooms, whether that's teachers or the ed techs or the folks that are supporting it. If you have that turnover and you're not keeping people, there's just an inherent loss that if you have to retrain and re-bring people into the culture and re-teach them the way Bonnie Eagle does stuff, there's an inherent expense to that. So being able to keep people here and, you know, benefits is part of that. You can't expect people to come to work somewhere where the benefits aren't good. I appreciate Mr. Carlo asking about the health benefits. You know, I won't reiterate it, but that was the question that I had. You know, do we have a way forward with trying to combat it? I mean, obviously, we're kind of at the mercy. I know I'm at the mercy of my employer, that it's painful every year and seems to just go up. I don't. I need health insurance though, so I pay it. So whatever you can do to try to combat that would be great. And then just one other high-level question. So I appreciate that you're the superintendent in the business office and everyone involved is trying to work on more precise budgeting to see if we can, you know, clean up some of those line items. Definitely heard that there's some risks that we're taking to remove some of the contingencies, to, you know, we're trying to wean off of the balance forward. Any sense on what this is going to look like? So this risk taking, obviously we hope that you roll the dice and we don't end up with some major expense that we weren't expecting. Thoughts about how this is going to look for future years, because I know that our business office isn't just thinking about 1 year. You guys are absolutely thinking about what this year's implications are for the next few years. I know carry forward is always a big discussion about that, but sort of what's the sense of, okay, we're taking some risks, we're cutting some budget items, hoping it works out for us. Do you have a sense of what that's going to kind of look like? How good are you feeling about the next few years after this?
I think, as I said, trying to budget more accurately is going to help us. I'm hoping, like Clay said, that with attrition, that maybe we balance some of the cutting of the positions with not having to use that fund balance. We'll have a clearer understanding after the end of this year. I think it's been a kind of a culture change for this district in getting all of our administrators on board with actually looking at their staffing levels and what they need, and not only on the instructional side, but on the operations side as well, with, you know, what are staffing levels for mechanics? What are staffing levels for custodians? What are staffing levels for our food service staff? It's just kind of everybody being aware of what our limitations are and trying to make the right decisions. So I can't say that I'm not concerned. I am concerned. I think it's going to be right away next year, because we're not going to be able to use $4 million again for when we you know, build the FY27 budget. So I think we're going to see right away, we're going to see the ramifications of using that 4 million right up front in FY '26.
So a follow-up question to that. Obviously, I know that you have already weighed all of this, but can you speak to it? So, we could use less from the fund balance this year. It would mean that the numbers would go up. I would guess, if I was just making a guess, that the rationale is that, home budgets being what they are in our community, everyone's feeling the pinch, so I'm assuming that we're just choosing to not face that risk now, to be sensitive to the community. Any risk to having to, backload on it and having it be a real time bomb for next year?
I think you're exactly right. That's the discussion that Clay and I have had and are willing to take that risk right now. With the climate the way it is, I think we have to do what we're doing.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you and Clay arrived at the $4.5 million number? What kind of variables went into that decision?
It was an overall of talking to finance and facilities and BAC and trying to get a gauge of what kind of support will we get from the community? Where's that breaking point of what will they support and what will we don't want a budget that's going to fail. So it was just discussing what's that overall number and how do we get to that number. And the only way to get to that number was using that fund balance. I mean, cutting what we could, making a lean budget as possible, and then using that fund balance to make up the difference.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of it is I think next year we need to show what the budget would be without it, right? Start out when we build the budget at its baseline, don't put the fund balance in there and see what that number is and then work from that place rather than this year. I think we kind of took the opposite approach because we were kind of forced into using so much last year. If you'll recall, if you'll hearken back to the broken record that is the health insurance increase, we had budgeted what we thought was a substantial increase of 6 to 8%, and then it came in at 12. So we had to at the last hour find $600,000, and we decided to take it from the fund balance rather than add to the budget. So that was the conversation last year at the last minute. This year, we kind of started by rolling forward a similar amount, a slightly reduced amount, but budgeted much, much higher for health insurance, thinking it was actually the absolute maximum, and we still, it wasn't quite enough. We budgeted 12%, it came in at 12.7. Manageable, not backbreaking. My point is, though, I think, agreeing with Dawn, basically, we're just saying a lot of words, that we were kind of forced into it, I think, for one more year. But next year, I would like to see it without any fund balance, what's the damage, and then work from a position of what do we add to it to offset that. Because that's, to everyone's point tonight, that's really what it should be for. It shouldn't be a given. The other factor for me is that discussion around how much we're allowed to have. And I know there's a 3-year rolling average, and nobody really comes and takes it from you. But to pass the straight face test, to be within the threshold allowed under statute, right? And yes, we have a high amount in our budget, so 9% of 68,000 is a lot, but we were in a territory where we were above that threshold, and even at 8+, we're still at the top end of what we're allowed. So this kind of also allows us to reset in that way, and it gives us a reason to say, look, now we're getting into the territory where we really shouldn't. Because I think for the general public, they look at $10 million and carry forward and say, oh, you're raising too much money, you shouldn't have that. We all know, I think some of us know that there's a reason for that and how it could help us, but we won't be there next year. We won't be there where people are gonna say, you have way too much fund balance. Now it can be, maybe we should only use 2 to buy the taxes down, right? So that's all part of our thinking and consideration, in addition to, again, continuing to look at what we can do to lower the overall ongoing budget.
So we use the carry forward balance to pay some of the costs of the health insurance increase. What else are we using that account to cover? Is there a specific list of, or is it just going towards the?
Correct. I can't say it's, pointed at this expense. It's really to get that overall number.
Like a revenue source, right? We're kind of using it.
Correct.
As a revenue source.
So, is it unreasonable to reject the premise that the budget is increasing by 2.7 when we're taking 4.5 out of the carry forward? It seems to me that we need to account for that money, and it's not accounted for in any of the articles, right? So it's almost like the budget is increasing by almost $7 million or more. What's your reaction to that?
Can I just jump in and say that I would say is accurate to a point, but the but that goes along with it, you could say the same thing about last year's budget, because last year we used 4.8, which is more, right, than what we're proposing this year. And I think if you go back to the year before, so I don't have the numbers in front of me to answer that specifically, but I think it wouldn't be apples to apples. Like, we'd have to really do an analysis of that. I think that increase is sort of an apples to apples increase compared to last year. But I do understand your greater point, and I think that speaks to what I was saying about showing the budget without carry forward added from day one next year, so we can get a better handle on what your, I think, greater point is.
And I just want to be clear. I'm not saying don't use the carry forward. It's clear. We need to use the carry forward this year. I think we need to account for our spending also. And can you refresh my memory on what were the driving forces behind last year's use of the carry forward? Because it wasn't all health insurance. There were other figures.
We settled 3 contracts.
I think it was salaries, I'm sure it was part of it. I'd have to go back and look, I can't remember.
And I think a philosophy has always been too that once you have a carry forward, the expectation is you sustain that going forward. So I think you're right. I agree with you that maybe that's not the best philosophy. And let's start looking at it differently. And not only that, but in one of the presentations I had done earlier, there were in the past, in 2024 is the first year. So we have budgeted to use fund balance every year. In 2024 was the first year we actually used some of that fund balance. In the years past, we've added to it. In 2024, we actually had to use a piece of it to fund. So as we get more closer to actual, our budgeting to actual, we're going to be using it as opposed to adding to it.
And I think, I don't know if this is correct, if it was last year or the year before, but did we have less revenue? Was it last year that we had like $1 million less on our 279? Because this year we had more, but I think the year before we might have had less, up to $1 million.
I don't think it was as much as $1 million, but it was less.
Some amount.
So I hear you loud and clear about the carry forward, 4.2 million, that concerns me as well. We also had, as Mr. Gleason just said, an additional 1.6 million on our ED 279. So you add that onto that 7 million, now over 8 million. So we really need to know and understand how that whole thing works. I agree with you. Thank you.
Director Sargent.
Just looking back at the FY proposed budget, if you look back at FY '24, special ed was, in round figures, $10 million. This year, it's 13 million. And I can remember a few years ago, it was 6 million. But we also outserviced a lot of things at that time, and we would get the bills at the end of the year. They come in July, you know, for Sweetser and different places where we had to send these students, and we're doing more in-house. So probably, although special ed has gone up a lot, we're doing a lot in the district to keep those numbers, actually total costs down. We could look back on it, but just from memory, special ed's gone up a lot, which means we're doing a better job of identifying students and meeting their needs and educating them, and there is a cost to it. And if any of the board members would take the time to go over to Buxton Center and take a tour there, I think you'd be duly impressed with the job that they do, the teachers, the administrators. I used to work with a DARE officer in Wyndham, and he was from Millinocket. A nice guy. And he said to me one day, he says, well, you can either educate them or you can incarcerate them. And that was his way of saying that, you know, you got to fund education. And Matt Sear was really an asset for the town of Wyndham. So that's all I have on that.
Director Sargent, I will say, I went with you on the tour to Buxton Center, as well as there's a whole group of directors. I believe Director Heath was also present that day. And we saw the special needs classroom. It was personally very moving to see the acute needs of students in this community. And as we budget, and I know the superintendent and the business manager and the advisory committee and all of us think similarly that students have to come first. And I think that that's reflected in this budget. So I want to be clear that my questions are not critiques. They're just trying to understand how we can find revenue enhancements and streamline services so that we can effectively provide the services that our community needs. Having said that, it may also be helpful to know what is not in the budget. And I'm wondering if we can also hear from either Carl or superintendent or the business manager on what were the items that, after careful consideration, did not make the cut, so we can have some situational awareness in terms of our priorities.
Can I go back to one other thing about special ed?
Certainly.
Of note, our current special ed director has worked to budget, again, more accurately, precisely. There in the past, the special ed budget would be lower, but then we'd have unbudgeted costs for out-of-district placements. So instead, she is budgeting for in-house costs that save the district, those high out-of-district placements, the cost of those. So it is expensive, special ed is expensive. My point is it's more planful, and in the past, I think it hadn't always shown up on a balance sheet because it was coming out of other sources, not when the budget was being built, if that makes sense. So it's true that special ed is costing more. We probably are getting more value for the money we're spending now compared to, there were other costs that could have been added on to those costs that show. I just wanted to say that. I don't know how to answer that question, because I think it would be hard. Carl might have some things, I won't put him on the spot, if he's welcome to share, if he has some thoughts. I think we all know our facilities needs are extensive, and John threw out a number of 30 million, it goes up every year, of just to bring our schools up to code and safety and ADA accessibility. Educationally, there was a lot of work done this year by the elementary team to try to find a way to add STEM teachers, science, technology, engineering, and math, because our science scores are poor. Teachers aren't having enough time to teach science because they're trying to focus on math and reading. They had been very creative and done some visiting of other schools. We're one of the few schools that doesn't have a program like that. Right now, it is not in our budget. They are still trying to find ways to perhaps make it happen by looking at those kindergarten numbers and combining other classrooms to be creative, to still do it, even in a hard budget year. And it's something we talked with the curriculum committee about recently. So that's something that they would have loved to have seen be on this list. One reason I didn't continue with further pre-K expansion, even though I think we could, one is space. But if we could find space, we could easily add another pre-K classroom in Standish, and everything that goes with that. And the grants just are starting to dry up around those things. There are language offerings at the high school are limited, partly because we can't find qualified people, but even when we do, we aren't necessarily seeing the numbers because we aren't able to build the program. We had offered Mandarin for the last, I think, 2 years, but I don't think we're going to be able to continue to offer it because there just isn't interest in it. We're gonna help the students who have started on that so they can at least get their second year for their college requirements. But that's an example of something that's probably a programming impact that's coming out of this budget. I think those are the ones that come to mind. I think Carl has a few things he wants to add to that list.
So when I was asked, Mr. Chair, directors, when I was asked to come here, when I was hired, I had about a month before I started putting together a budget. So it was kind of, I had already done a budget at my last district, so it was a different experience doing two in a year. However, there was a lot of things that need to be done that I tried to get in with supplemental requests at the end, and it just wasn't funded. ADA improvements to the home bleachers at the athletic fields. The track is in severe disrepair. I asked for $250,000 to resurface it. I'm afraid that not doing it this year is going to cost us another $250,000, so it might be $500,000 when we finally decide to repair it. Other things, parking lot maintenance. Nobody's ever crack sealed all your parking lots, seal coated. Line striping, there should be money in the budget for that, which it isn't. The list is ongoing. Inspections and testings that haven't been done throughout the years. I'm just starting to add those into the budget. That's part of my increases. I'm finding out stuff that I didn't know because I was from New Hampshire. We have different laws when it comes to fuel dispensing and stuff like that. So I'm learning new certificates that are going to have to be added over the next couple of years. The playgrounds. I had $250,000 a year to start replacing your playgrounds. They're 20 years old. The protective coatings are flaking off. We haven't put enough wood chips in them. We have concrete sticking out of the ground on the bottom of the posts, and I've already added 300 yards of playground chips to these playgrounds. I need probably another 800 yards to just get us where we need to be for now, and then we have to add it every year. There's a lot of things that we are not doing because of budget limitations, but we have to pick and choose the things that matter the most. Thank you.
Playgrounds were a good one. I already blocked it out because that was just so disappointing that we knew it's so expensive. And again, our staff are being creative. Buxton Center is out there trying to pursue grants, teaming up with the Best Buddies organization. There's a chance they might fund a wonderful playground for that school, and that'd be great, but it isn't going to help HPMRE. It isn't going to help Hollis, right? And we're gonna be at a point where we take the funds we have and we make the best of it. We're gonna have to take out unsafe structures. I think Carl is committed to getting like the swing sets fixed so kids can swing. And we might have to invest in like balls and frisbees and just regular toys so kids can play. But they aren't going to have play structures and slides and monkey bars that are either unsafe or old and falling apart. So that's a great one, and it's super expensive.
Okay. Are there any further questions? There'll be more opportunities later, but just in terms of moving on with the agenda. We also have a review of the proposed 2025-2026 adult education budget. So I'm not hearing that we have any more questions for the time being, but we'll go on to that now, which is item 6.
I think, Tina, I don't know if you can put it back up, just the page that, we don't have a depth of detail on this budget other than the numbers on that chart. And adult ed specifically didn't have much of an increase over last year.
No, it was actually a decrease,
Yeah.
0.67%. And she had a evening clerical position that was unfilled that we removed from the budget, which made up that decrease, really.
And in your packet, there is the detail of the adult ed
Yes.
budget too. We didn't feel, I guess, that I didn't think it was something we would get into great depth about because it is specifically because it's such a decrease.
And
Especially,
again, looking at her actual expenses and what she spent year over year, this isn't a budget where she's going to have to eliminate anything. She'll be able to run her program effectively. The nutrition services,
hold on that because that's actually the next agenda item and we don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Any questions? Give Mr. Carlo an opportunity to ask any questions.
What are we doing?
Adult ed, any questions on that?
Oh, there are no.
Well, I think
I'm sorry. I was going to try and avoid it, but my question is for the adult education budget. I don't have any local warrant information, and so, or maybe it's on a different page and I'm not seeing it. Is the local share, the local warrant going to go down?
no. And
Okay.
I did not have it go down because of the seminar you gave.
All right. I just wanted to know if
Correct.
the local share was going down. Thank
The
you.
local share is increasing very little.
Yes.
But it is increasing.
Fantastic. Thank you.
in the packet, that the 123-page packet, we didn't obviously provide that in paper form, because it's a lot, but I think you're looking at page 118, 117, 116, thanks, yeah. So anyone who wants to reference it.
Oh, this is nutrition.
If we were to add a slide like we did, I'm thinking of the budget meeting, can you think of what similar kinds of drivers, and maybe you don't have that right off the top of your head, but yeah, it's hard.
I'll make sure we have
Because like
it for-
I know in the next item, we're going to be saying salary and benefits as one of the things that's driving the school nutrition, but we'll get to that.
What's their enrollment? Is their enrollment skyrocketing?
Adult ed?
Yeah.
I believe she provided those numbers for you. I don't have them off the top, but she had provided the enrichment classes and the high set and
No.
She had provided that separately in a different.
right, it was an email that she provided.
Did everybody get it? I have it. I'll just look.
I think she just responded to your questions.
All right. Well, I'm not going to belabor this any longer. Who's that? All right. Well, unless there are no other questions, then we'll go on to nutrition.
So school nutrition has a more substantial increase. Some of it is salaries and benefits. There are some other nuances to this, I think, Dawn, aren't there, too, what drove?
A lot of it is, the budget was never, it wasn't based on actual expenses. Because they're a program that if their revenues exceed their expenses, they're not tied in like the general fund, where they can only spend what is passed at the referendum. Their budget can be exceeded. So this looks like it's high, but our budget has, the expenses have actually exceeded the budget in the past. So what I'm trying to do is create a realistic budget for nutrition services. This is, yes, a part of it is salary and benefits. Their big increase for salaries was this current year. So yes, the health insurance would be the 12.7 for them as well. But a big portion of this is just the cost of food. That would be the biggest driver in this budget. Where they had, local grants where you were rewarded for buying local produce and that sort of thing. A lot of those aren't available anymore. So as much as we want to, shop locally and get our things from the area, it's just not possible. It is possible, it costs more money. So we try to do it whenever we can. But again, trying to be fiscally responsible. And then there are also requirements with, she had just undergone an audit that was done by the state. And she has to, our nutrition director has to be able to prove that whenever she can, she's buying not just locally, but domestically in the United States. So when she buys items from Cisco or these companies, they don't tell us where they're getting their kiwis or where they're getting, so it's really hard for her to try. So now she deals with vendors that are, pretty big vendors, and she has to ask them where they're getting these products. And that was one of the findings in the audit, was making sure that when you're dealing with these vendors, and she's also part of a cooperative agreement with other school districts in the area. So they go out to bid and try to get the best prices for their, for all of their supplies that they need. And not only do we try to get the best price, but now she has to be concerned about where these companies are getting their products and not being written up on the state side because the vendors don't provide that sort of information.
Have we noticed an increase in the number of students participating in?
She has. I don't have those numbers with me, but I did ask her that question, and she has seen an increase in the participation rates.
So we're revenue neutral. The state program doesn't cost us money, and it doesn't provide any additional income, correct?
So we get, per meal, we're reimbursed a certain amount of money from the federal government. And then the state, because the state is choosing to do no charge for your basic meals. So the federal government will reimburse us so much per meal, and then the state kicks in the rest to make us whole. Does that answer your question? And then she still offers what's called a la carte for healthy items that aren't necessarily part of the meal. You can buy a bottle of water, and you can buy some healthy type, maybe granola bars or that sort of thing that the students actually pay out of pocket for. But the meals, there's no charge for those.
So more students are participating in the program, and that's not costing us more money.
Correct.
Okay. Good to know.
So, do you anticipate that the expenditures are going to be more than the revenues this year? You said you can overspend. Do you think that's happening this year?
Current year?
Yeah, are you trying, because you said you're trying to make it so, to bring them more in line, so whatever we're getting, they're supposed to basically offset,
So,
right?
Well, right now, the budget, I think we're going to exceed our budget. But our revenues are going to cover
Okay.
that increase. So we're not going to have a shortfall. We're not going to have a, deficit situation.
So when we're talking about an increase in the nutrition budget, it's all going to be offset by state and federal revenue, right? So it's basically a zero.
There is a local share as well.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
not to go back to the previous item, but I just want to apologize. Our adult ed director had provided a summary, a very nice summary, and I didn't even think about including it in your packet. She had prepared it because I think the chair had a couple questions, and it was a pretty thorough explanation, so it is now in your email, and we'll include it in the packet. But one thing of note about adult ed is I believe she said 40, if I read it quickly, but I think she has 41 high school completion students, and that's a little bit more than last year, but I think that's not far out of line with what she's had, but it is a little bit higher, which is good. And she actually was talking about being here tonight, but had some medical issue and couldn't make it, or would have been here. I'm sure glad to talk about it. But what we'll do is add a slide for these two items for the budget meeting so that it's more in line with what we did with the other articles.
Certainly be thinking about Linda and hoping for the best. No worries about that. But do feel free to take a moment and review the information if you'd like to. She did provide a thorough memo about the nature of her requests. Any further questions? Oh, sorry. Dr. Dakotas.
I'm not sure if this is relevant, but is there, the summer, do we have any food coverage for the children over the summer?
She provides meals for summer school, but it's not
For the families?
correct. And it has to do with we have to qualify to be able to do that.
Yep.
And we haven't qualified, which is why she couldn't do it for everybody. There are requirements as to where you can feed kids and what the disadvantaged rates are, and there are all kinds of hoops you have to jump through. And
Thank you.
I will say, though, she explores that. Every year, she
Yes.
looks into it, she goes through the process to find out if we do qualify, and we just haven't for a couple of years now.
All right. Item 8, report of the Committee on Finance and Facilities. 8.1, first reading, resolutions for first reading. Resolution 39, approval of the proposed 2025-2026 school district budget for fiscal year 2025. Is there objection to waiving the reading? Hearing.
Could I offer comment, not an objection?
Is there objection to waiving the reading? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The resolution will have been considered read once. I just provide some advice to members of the following. Rule 15 requires that all resolutions be read twice previous to its adoption. It also requires that readings occur no more than 24 hours between each other to give members some time to review the materials. Although the board could suspend that rule and vote on Resolution 39 tonight, negating the need for any further special meetings on this resolution. So as it stands now, the resolution has been read once, and the board has completed its business tonight on this agenda. However, the board may, if it chooses to, suspend the rule and vote on the budget this evening if 2/3 of us say we're ready to vote. For what it's worth, some people may not be ready to vote. And if that motion were to be made, I'm sure would vote accordingly. So I will entertain a motion to suspend the rule and conduct a second reading at this time. And if that motion is not made, then the next order of business would be adjournment. Dr. Moran. Director Moran moves to suspend the rules for the purpose of granting this resolution a second reading at this time. Is there a second? The pending question is to suspend the rules for the purpose of allowing this resolution to be granted a second reading at this time. Is the board ready for the question? Director Kreutz. We'll go in alphabetical order.
I have no problem. I appreciate we've had this material. I appreciate the updates that have been made and everything's been presented. So personally, I have no problem voting on second reading tonight. But we do already have a meeting on the books for tomorrow night. If we decided to move forward with voting on the budget tonight, we would still have the meeting tomorrow night to go through the other items. We have, warrants and whatnot. Would that be moved to this evening rather than tomorrow night?
The chair would answer in the affirmative.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Meserve.
So by approving this, does that mean the SRO is not going to be included for the budget?
The chair would advise that no amendments have been made to the proposed budget. The motion before the board is to grant the resolution a second reading at this time, not to adopt it. So the next vote after this would be to adopt the budget, at which point an amendment could be presented to add any further items or remove current proposed items.
Thank you.
Superintendent.
I just wanted to make sure people understand that if we proceed, it will not be a quick process because we have to sign on camera, I believe. Some of the documents have to be signed, so there is still an extensive process. It isn't just one vote and then we're adjourning. I just want everyone to know that.
The chair would further advise, just to be clear, that the motion to suspend the rules does in fact require 2/3 support, at which point the resolution would be considered read twice. But the following motion to adopt the budget would just require simple majority. Is the board ready for the question? All those in favor? All those opposed? All right. 8 directors voting in the affirmative and 2 in the negative. Motion prevails. And the motion is agreed to. Resolution 39, resolution second reading, approval of the proposed 2025-2026 school district budget for fiscal year 2025-2026 has been considered read twice. Chair recognizes Director Marian for the purpose of the motion to adopt the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to adopt the budget.
Director Marian moves to adopt Resolution 39. Is there a second? Second. Director Sargent, pending question is the adoption of Resolution 39. Is the board ready for the question? All those in favor? All those opposed? 9 directors voting in the affirmative and none in the negative. What did I say? None or one? I thought I said one. And one director voting in the negative, motion prevails and the resolution is adopted. Board will be at ease. As we are circulating the warrants, Pursuant with Rule 4, Section 8, the special meetings of the board scheduled Tuesday, April 29th and Wednesday, April 30th are hereby canceled. Board to be at ease. Director Welch.
I move that the warrants and notices of election presented to the meeting be approved and that an election be called for June 10th, 2025, for the purpose of conducting an at-large school board election as described therein. And further move that the foregoing warrants and notices shall each be signed by a majority of the school board and that such signatures may be made electronically by exception of counterparts or in person at the convenience of the members of the school board. And further moved.
No. Director Welch moves that the warrants and notices of election presented to the meeting be approved and that an election be called for June 10th, 2025 for the purpose of conducting an at-large school board election as described therein. Further move that the foregoing warrants and notices shall each be signed by a majority of the school board and that such signatures may be made electronically by execution or of counterparts or in person at the convenience of the members of the school board. Is there a second? Director Heath. Is the board ready for the question? All those in favor? All those opposed? 10 directors voting in the affirmative and none in the negative. Motion prevails. And the motion is agreed to. Director Welch.
Move that the warrants for the main school administrative district number 6, the district, budget meeting presented to the meeting be approved and that a district budget meeting be hereby called for May 15th for the purposes of voting on the annual budget for the district for 2025-2026 fiscal year.
Director Welch moves that the warrant for the main school administrative district number 6 budget meeting be presented to the meeting be approved and that a district budget meeting be called for May 15th, 2025 for the purpose of voting on the annual budget for the district for the 2025-2026 school year. Director Welch further moved that the warrant and notice of election for the district budget validation referendum presented to the meeting be approved and that a district budget validation referendum be called for June 10th, 2025 for the purpose of approving the budget adopted at the district budget meeting for the 2025-2026 fiscal year and considering whether to continue the budget validation referendum process. And Director Welch further moved that the form of the notice of amounts adopted at the budget meeting presented to this meeting be approved, and that the superintendent of schools of the district be authorized and directed to complete said notice in accordance with the district budget meeting on May 15th, 2025, and to cause copies of said notice as completed to be delivered to municipal clerks of each municipality in the district for posting at the polling places for the June 10th, 2025 district budget validation referendum. Is there a second? Director Kreutz. The chair would inquire if any director wishes that the motion be reduced to writing. For the benefit of members who may wish to read the motion, as opposed to having it been read to them,
Can you just read it again? No, I'm kidding.
the chair will reread the motion.
No.
All right.
Point of order. I lied.
So there's been a motion and a second. Is the board ready for the question? All those in favor? All those opposed? 10 directors voting in the affirmative and none in the negative. Motion prevails, and the motion is agreed to. The board will be in order. Do we need to? We also. We vote on these two, correct? We didn't do that. Approval and signing of the, that's for the school board election. You want to? Budget validation. Yeah. The board will be in order. Director Welch.
I move we approve to authorize the superintendent of schools to tally and certify the results of the June 10th, 2025 at-large school board elections and budget validation referendum.
Director Welch moves to authorize the superintendent of schools to tally and certify the results of the June 10th, 2025 at-large school board election and the budget validation referendum. Is there a second? Director Sargent, is the board ready for the question? All those in favor? All those opposed? 10 directors voting in the affirmative and none in the negative. Motion prevails, and the motion is agreed to. Is there objection to authorizing the signing of the warrants for the budget validation referendum scheduled for Tuesday, June 10th, 2025? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The board will be at ease. Director Welch?
I move to adjourn.
Just a comment, I want to thank Chair, Mr. Marin, for his leadership this year as Chair of Finance and Facilities, leading us through a difficult budget, and I think we've got a good budget going forward and something good for the public. I also want to thank Dawn and the business office for supplying us with numbers endlessly, because we've looked at this and looked at this, and I'm really happy with what we've got. Thank you.
All right, Director Welch?
I move to adjourn.
Director Welch moves to adjourn. Is there a second? Dr. Dakotas? Pending question is adjournment. Is the board ready for the question? All those in favor? All those opposed? 10 directors voting in the affirmative and none in the negative. Motion prevails, and the board stands adjourned until Monday, May 5th at 6 o'clock in the afternoon.